Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/malicious compliance. In today's episode, nah, we don't need a professional to fell these trees, okay? Bought the wrong software and don't want to admit you made a mistake? Cool, pay 5x as much and lose your job. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Nah, we don't need a professional to fell these trees, okay? Temp account is the events written about happened in a rather small town, and some people might know my actual nick. Also, English is not my native language, so please excuse any mistakes. This is the story of how my dad, with my consent, but against my advice, accidentally weaponized a tree. I live in the capital of a Central European country, and recently visited my parents at the countryside. They needed me to help to deal with some trees they wanted to fell. I assumed they wanted to finally make short work of the semi-healthy trees along the driveway that kept branching into the way. But no. They decided that the row of beeches at the southeastern corner of the property had to go. You should know 3 things here. 1, those trees are really tall, like 15 meters, about 50 feet, and rather thin. 2, there is an equally high barn just a few meters behind those trees on the neighbor's property to the south. It is pretty old, but has been renovated time and time again to serve as a storage and party location. 3, in front of the trees are compost containers, a crooked walnut tree and bushes that my mother planted, creating a corridor of only around 7 meters, 23 feet, for the trees to land in without breaking anything. Also important, my sister, also living in a bigger city and not present when these events took place, and I are actually the co-owners of the house and property as my father transferred ownership to us some years ago. While so far those beeches had survived their fair share of storms, they'd probably become a problem as they kept growing. And since new neighbors on the property bordering on the eastern side are in the process of building a house, they'd be their problem as well. So I agreed that they had to go. However, my parents wanted to fell them by themselves, meaning my dad would be the one to operate the chainsaw on them. He worked as a technician before retiring, always did a lot of repair and building work in and around the house. But he is past 70, has adopted a rather unhealthy lifestyle after leaving the workforce, and his eyesight and motoric skills, while still perfectly suited for most kinds of technical operations, have deteriorated a bit. Knowing this, I objected and suggested hiring a professional to do the job and sharing the costs. I argued that any damaged beechwood is pretty heavy, or injury that might occur if things went sideways wouldn't be covered by insurance and thus come in quite costly. Also, doing this without even as much as notifying the local authorities might be illegal. Okay, it's the countryside. If any regulations of such kind even exist, folks here like to interpret them as friendly advice rather than an actual law, but I digress. My parents wouldn't have any of it, and even refused to get an estimate from a professional. I did some basic research and found out that the costs would probably come in at around €500 to €1,000, $600 to $1,200. Not a small sum, but the forester or lumberjack who'd take up the work would be responsible for any damage. No dice, even after trying to bring my points across several times. Nah, we don't need a professional. Why should we waste money when we can do it by ourselves, they said. It will be fine, they said, literally. And while I usually am able to put them off bad ideas by convincing one of them, this time both were hellbent on going for it. And once that is the case, all hope is basically lost, as especially my mother can be the most stubborn as heck. At least I know whom I inherited this trait from. As property co-owner, I technically could have just forbidden my parents to fell those trees on their own. But they're my parents, I love them, they're adults, they live there and keep stuff in order, so I refrained from taking this route. So I told them that they should go ahead if they really want to, but I would not help them with this. My mom asked if I would help them cutting it up and carrying the wood once the trees were laying on the ground, important aspect. I agreed. Also, I begged them to wait for my sister to call them the next day at lunchtime, since I messaged her about the situation, and she wanted to back me up. But no. Next morning I was woken up by my mother calling me to help cutting up the first tree which my father had brought down successfully. So I dutifully crawled out of bed and did my part in this little deforestation project. Tree 2 and 3, out of 5, also were felled without any incidents. Then came tree 4. My father apparently had not seen a higher up branch that stretched between the branches of tree 5. So once the chainsaw had fully severed the stem, instead of falling sideways as intended, it got caught up, swirled around its axis and crashed into the walnut tree, which started to bend significantly due to the load. Now they wanted me to help moving the beech by pushing it to roll along the edge of one of the walnut tree's main branches. Besides me knowing that this wasn't doable, as I said, a 15 meters high tree is a heavy affair, I refused. But you said you'd help us once a tree is felled, they pleaded. I pointed out that I'd only assist once it was laying on the ground, and leaning into the walnut tree doesn't quite fit that definition. More pleading, but now it was my time to be stubborn, and rightfully so. Since there was no way to, or machinery, to pull the beech away, my father decided to cut parts off its lower stem until handling it would be possible. Multiple laws of physics, however, intervened after he had cut the second large chunk, shifting the center of mass of the beech, so that it suddenly started to tilt when its branches prevented it from sliding downwards as intended. Then the walnut tree reacted to the lighter load and shift of balance by springing back, knocking the beech into the neighbor's barn like a battering ram. The dry wooden wall planks didn't stand a chance and splintered away as the felled tree forced its way into the building, creating an impressive hole. My parents now stood there, dumbfounded. My dad slowly scratched his head and tried to realize the situation, while my mother slowly started to panic. Oh no, what do we do now? What if the neighbor calls the police on us? I had watched the spectacle from the balcony and couldn't decide whether to be shocked or to descend into uncontrollable laughter. Closer investigation from outside showed that the tree had crushed a chair, a table, and also caused a cupboard with party equipment to collapse. Though my dad had at least reached his goal and freed the beech from the grasp of the walnut tree. But there was no way of getting it unstuck from the barn without entering. A few hours later, the neighbor who knew about my parents' plans returned home, which is where this story might have taken a very bitter and costly turn. But he proved to be a very gracious guy and took the incident, which in the worst case could have made the whole barn collapse, in stride. He first was negatively amazed by what had transpired, but after inspection of the barn he didn't deem it to be necessary to involve the insurance or officials and said he would repair the damage by himself if my parents agreed to pay for the materials, replacement of the destroyed furniture, thanks, neighbor, and some beer, probably a lot of beer, for his time, which they gladly repeated. His bill isn't yet in as he has just begun patching up the hole, but it will easily be upwards of €2,000, roughly $2,400, plus the beer of course, still making a professional tree removal look like a really good deal. My father offered him to assist with the repairs. The neighbor thought about it for the fraction of a second and then politely declined. I wonder why. 3. P.S. Tree 5 is still standing. Bought the wrong software and don't want to admit you made a mistake? Cool, pay 5x as much and lose your job. Reading these delicious stories reminded me of my own MC story that happened over 20 years ago. Conversations from memory may have minor details altered, but the story's the same. I had worked about 2 years at this point for a MSP, at the time called a systems integrator, and they generously paid for the engineers/techs to obtain industry certifications. I started out as an on-call contractor setting up desktops, and they hired me on full-time after about 3 months. By the time the MC occurred, I had worked my way up to junior level engineer, obtained my MCSE, CNA, and was working towards my CNE and Cisco certs. At the time, Novell and Microsoft were neck and neck in server operating system dominance, hence getting both certs. With book study and field experience, I wasn't an expert, but I held my own. One day I get called into the boss office to meet with him, the owner, and the salesperson. The owner told me with a gleam in his eye that the company just landed a major, high-profile client, our city's pro basketball team, and they've agreed to give us a small task to prove ourselves. I was to install and configure backup software on their Windows server, important later, and test to ensure it works. The team offered the carrot of not only signing a long-term support contract, but also a recommendation to their business partners and other teams if I was successful. This was definitely within my wheelhouse. I figured 1 hour tops, in and out. I showed up to the arena, checked in with security, and I'm escorted to the business office area. A lady we'll call Karen comes out and introduces herself as the CIO. Karen spent the first 45 minutes of my time there to take me on a grand tour of the business office. I saw the owner's offices, the GM's office, her office, pictures of framed, autographed jerseys, the nearly empty trophy case, and the big glass window that overlooks the court. She even said I'm welcome to eat lunch in the staff dining area. She then said she's taking me to the server room. In another circumstance, I would have considered the tour a treat, but 3 things. First, I had another client to see that day, and this was messing up my schedule. Not a big deal, I can have the office call the client to move the visit back a little. Second, the team hadn't exactly been playing championship caliber basketball except the last 2 years prior. Before that, they made the playoffs twice in 15 years and got their heads kicked in both times. Third, my favorite basketball team is this team's rival, so it's cool, but I'm not over the moon. Then she asked if I was ready to see the server room. We turn a couple of corners, and she unlocked the door to a really small office. Boxes stacked in one corner, spare furniture in another. At the back wall sat an old-school CRT monitor hooked to an old-school KVM switch box on a desk connected to 2 tower computers sitting side by side on the carpeted floor. Right next to the monitor sat a stack of network switches with a spaghetti of cables that ran haphazardly up the wall and into a removed panel of the fake ceiling. On top of the towers sat a box with the backup software. Karen waved her hand at the setup, pointed to a sheet with some handwriting on it, said I should have everything I need, and she'll be in her office if I had any questions. She left me to it, and after I called the home office to reschedule my other client, I started assessing the situation. I quickly saw the first problem. The NetWare server was already set up to run backups, but going by the status report date on the screen, backups hadn't been running for months. The software was only an add-on module to backup email folders. Using the credentials on the sheet, I logged into the Windows Server running Exchange to handle all the email. I tried to look at different settings, and I quickly realized I only had limited permissions. I logged to the Novell server, and I didn't have enough permissions. I walked back to the CIO's office. So far, Karen's been pretty chill, but suddenly Karen flipped the Karen switch on. Maybe I didn't seem impressed enough with the tour. Me, 2 problems. First, I need admin permissions to do the work you need done. Second, Karen, why do you need admin permissions? Me too. Install and configure the backup software? The software also. Karen, why can't you just use the accounts I gave you? Me, because they don't have enough permissions? Also the backup soft. Karen, my other tech, let's call him Paul, uses those accounts fine to run the backups. Why do you need extra permissions? Picks up the desk phone and dials, "Hey Paul, could you come to my office now please?" Thanks. Me, probably because he has backup operator permissions. Higher permissions are needed to install software. Speaking of which, Karen, after Paul knocks on the door and enters. Have you had any problems with the daily backups? Paul, no. Why? Karen, Federal 9 here says he needs extra permissions to install the backup software. Do you agree? Paul, look side to side, I'm not sure as I just handle the desktop. Karen, if Paul can manage backups with those accounts, I don't see why you can't install the software, Federal 9. Me, how did you install the software originally? Karen, all of this was set up before I started here, and I was brought in to clean all of this up. Me, Is there anyone else who manages the servers? Karen, no, it's just me and him. Me, I see. Would you come with me, please? I need to show you something. Karen, why? Me, it's easier to show you than explain. Karen rolls her eyes, gets up from her desk, and motions for Paul to come with. We all go back to the server room. Me, okay, first let me ask. My understanding is you want the backup software installed on the Windows server, right? Karen, of course, so it can perform brick-level backups of the email. You guys said you were sending one of your best. How do you not know about backups? For those who don't know, brick-level backups at that time, not sure what it's called now, meant the software allowed the backup and restore of individual emails, not the entire email database. So, if someone deleted one email and wanted just that one restored, that could happen instead of restoring/overwriting the entire database and losing new emails processed since the last backup. It also saved a lot of time. Me, that's why I'm asking. You bought an add-on module for the Novell server, showing her where it says on the box. I can't install this on Windows. Karen snatches the box from my hand. I called the software company myself and ordered it from them directly after I told them the setup here. Are you saying they lied to me and sold me the wrong product or made a mistake? Me, no, I'm not saying that as I wasn't part of the conversation. I'm only saying this is for Novell, and I can't install this on Windows. Karen, so they sold me the wrong software? Me, can we go to their website or call them? Karen rolls her eyes, fine. Let's go back to my office. Back at her office, she sat down, went to the website while I stood behind her, then spun around to me with a smirk on her face after a few mouse clicks. See? This is what I bought. It says right here it will back up Microsoft Exchange servers. Me, well, this doesn't say brick-level backups. And it says for Novell servers. Can you click where it says Microsoft? Karen sighs and clicks. This is pointless. I bought what I bought because it's half the cost. When I called, they said this would also back up my Exchange server. Why would it back up a Windows server, but not install on a Windows server? That makes no sense. Me, pointing to the screen, it says right there the Windows version performs brick-level backups. The NetWare version will back up the emails, but the entire database. And it will restore the entire database as one file, but it can't do brick-level backups or restores. A server can back up anything as long as it can see it on a network, and it has permissions to it. Karen, here's the bottom line. They told me this would work. I'm paying you to make this work, so make it work. Or tell me you can't make it work, and I'll find someone who can. Enter the malicious compliance. Me, it'll work but not like how you think. And if you want to, air quotes, make it work, it will only install on Novell. Can I show you? Karen sighs and hands me the software box. Me, I still need an admin login. After several more minutes of debate over the admin login, she reluctantly logged me into the Windows server. I put the CD into the Windows server, and nothing happened. I brought up the CD in Explorer to show her folders and files, but no executable, and no way really to install. She unlocked the Novell console, I inserted the CD, mounted it, and the install autoran. I didn't look back, but I could feel her eyes burning holes into the back of my head. In about 30 minutes, I installed the software, configured it to back up the Exchange server boxes as well as the rest of the data on both servers, and performed a successful test backup, all while she hovered over me with her arms crossed. I noticed that backups hadn't been running, and after checking the logs to find the problem, I configured the scheduled service to log in with the backup operator account credentials. Tested again successfully. Me, by the way, your backups haven't been running for about 3 months. I fixed that for you. The scheduled service didn't have a login account configured, so I plugged in the backup operator username password. Karen, what do you mean? You saw the status screen when we walked in and it said a successful backup? And you said you needed admin rights? Me, yes, that was the last successful backup, which was months ago. Switching to the log file on screen, here's the date and time of the last successful backup. Configuring a backup job and installing software are two different tasks that need two different sets of permissions. Karen stomped to the door, opened it, and yelled for Paul. When he arrived, she lit into him so loudly someone from the cubicles came into the room to see what the problem was. I still feel bad about that because it wasn't Paul's fault. After 3 hours, I left and immediately called my boss from the car, explaining exactly what happened. Sure enough, Karen had already called. My boss reassigned my other client and asked me to come back. When I got back to the office, the owner, my boss, and I went to the conference room, and we set up a conference call with Karen and the backup software support team. They looked up Karen's account and politely explained that according to the notes, they told Karen to buy the Windows version for brick-level backups of Exchange email accounts. But Karen balked at the price, so they offered her the Novell version with the caveat that it would perform entire Exchange database backups and user folders only. I wasn't completely right, but right enough. Karen now insisted that they only sold her what they sold her because she threatened to buy their competitor's software. After she demanded a supervisor, the supervisor got on the call and said she needed to buy the correct software. They would make an exception to their no refunds on open software policy and give her a partial credit. Otherwise, she could go ahead and buy the competitor's software and she would get no refund at all. Karen huffed and puffed and tried playing the "do you know who I work for" card, but they wouldn't budge. She had no other choice. After the software company hung up, Karen asked the owner when he could send me out to finish the job. He muted the phone and asked me if I wanted to go back out there, and I said no. He asked me if I would go if he sent a senior there with me, and I agreed. He then unmuted and told Karen that to make sure there are no issues, he was sending me with a senior engineer, and he made a deal with her. If the senior corrected my work, there would be no charge for service. However, if I was correct, then she would pay for my time today plus the time for both me and the senior on the second visit. Also, she would need to make sure that we had full administrative access and not hover while we worked. Agree to all conditions or we don't come back. Karen agreed and added in that she would definitely not work with us again, then hung up abruptly. We went back after Karen got the correct software. I installed it without a hitch even though she had enabled remote desktop on the server to watch me. I also wrote up a job aid for Paul with screenshots to manage backup jobs. The senior saw I knew what I was doing, so to pass the time he made a list of recommendations for her: server racks, anti-static mats, UPS, racks for the switches, cable management, adequate ventilation and temperature controls, physically securing the room, disaster recovery plan, etc. He emailed them to Karen and CC'd me, my boss, and the owner. The invoice we sent her charged her for 3 hours for my first visit, plus the hour at my rate, and another hour for the senior at the higher rate. A few months later, my boss told me they got a call back from the team's new CIO. He said after the team restructured the business unit, he took Karen's place and hired additional staff. Paul discovered the recommendation list among a bunch of emails Karen had deleted with a brick-level restore of her emails that I set up. The new CIO wanted to know how soon the company could send someone to complete the recommendation list and consult his staff on additional recommendations. Since the new CIO was hiring his own staff, he wouldn't need us for a long-term support contract, but he would definitely call us when he needed any work done they couldn't handle.